Good morning, everybody. Well, it's good to see everybody here. Earlier I was going to be like, everyone move in because we're all spread out. But now everyone showed up. I think I'm going to move service to 10:30 without telling you. Uh, yeah, that'd be good, right? Well, has there ever been a story that you've heard, or maybe like a book, or like you read, like maybe it's like one of your favorite books. Like there's the Dragon Riders of Pern. I love those books, right? They need to be in the movies. I want to see them in like real life someday. But there are quite frankly a lot of stories in the Bible that I would say fall under that category as well, right? Like they're really compelling stories, and one of the books of the Bible that I would put towards the top of my list of movies of these type of stories that would make a good movie would be the Book of Esther. In fact, if you read the Book of Esther, it reads a little bit like a screenplay. Okay, like there's 3 acts to Esther. 3 different scenes, and there's some character development that takes some place over the time. And I'll say, and if you turn the Book of Esther into a movie, okay, I'm not sure what kind of rating you're going to get first off, but quite frankly, because there's some stuff in there, right? There's a lot of violence, there's some political scandal, there's wild parties, and there's some scenes in the Book of Esther you wouldn't want to watch if you were sitting next to your mom. It's that kind of a story, and God is never mentioned in the Book of Esther as well. Never brought up, never referenced, not even ever acknowledged. And so maybe I guess Hollywood actually would be interested in something like that, maybe, right? Like they would love that kind of movie. It just seems like it's an unusual book to read in the Bible. It's an unusual story to read. And it doesn't even mention God. It's very interesting. And we're going to spend the next 3 weeks studying the Book of Esther. And we're going to be calling this series, we're going to call it In the Shadows. And more of that in a little bit, but let's start with Act 1, Scene 1 of this movie, okay? It takes place in the royal palace. If you can picture this palace here, and inside this palace is a royal party, right? And we're going to be introduced to a king. Did I miss a slide? I had one in there. One more. I got pictures. Okay, I'm going to be honest. I got really involved with ChatGPT this week. To the point where I had multiple days of like, you've used up your allotment of free ones, so you get to wait till tomorrow. I'm like, oh, okay. So I had to go back and do some more. So think of this. This is like a Persian style palace that you would see like back in the day, and inside this palace is a royal party, and we are introduced to a king. All right, a king. His name is King Xerxes. Okay, the king of Persia. Now, first character we meet in this story is King Xerxes. And for some of you, if this helps, if you've ever seen the movie 300, he's the bad guy. He's the evil king on the other side. He's the portrayed in that movie. So Xerxes, he reigned in Persia from 485 to 465 BC. So that's 465 years before Jesus was born. His kingdom extended from India into the east, all the way to Ethiopia in the south. So this is a man who has lots of power, right? In fact, the Persians ran the show. Like that's who was in charge. And during this time, the Greeks were up and coming. The Greek Empire was coming up during this time period. But the Persians were running things. But King Xerxes was the most powerful man on the planet. And so we need someone in this role, right? In this movie we're making out, the story, we need someone to play King Xerxes. Scholars tell us he was in his 40s. So we're going to see here as we learn a little bit about him. He was distinguished, but also a little crazy. Right? A little crazy. He was at times cruel, but could also be tender. Okay, and so kind of this complicated character. And I'm thinking that we cast Joaquin Phoenix as King Xerxes, right? Right? That's pretty good, right? Yeah. And I hope that helps to kind of think of this character, right? And you put a face to it as we go through this story. I like having faces to things as I'm reading things. And so, In the Shadows, starring Joaquin Phoenix as King Xerxes. I like that. That sounds good. Sounds good. And here's what I can tell you about King Xerxes. King Xerxes, he loved a good time. Okay? A good time for a long time is kind of his motto, right? When we first meet him in the 3rd year of his reign, he throws this huge, giant party, and he invites military commanders and advisors and the political leaders. And I don't know about the longest party you've ever been to, but let's just do this by show of hands. Okay, how many of you made it to midnight on New Year's Eve? Right? Okay. Just be proud of it if you did. That's okay. Those that didn't, well, you're lightweights. I'm sorry, but because King Xerxes, when he throws a party, Esther chapter 1 verse 4 says he threw his party for a full 180 days. Or some of you would call that freshman year, right? Like it's a 6-month party that he threw. And what do you do at the end of 6 months? A 6-month party? You think you would crash for like 10 or 12 weeks, right? Trying to recover from all that, but not King Xerxes. No, King Xerxes is like, hey, that was an epic party. How should we celebrate the celebration? We should probably throw another celebration for this. And so someone said, how about we throw a party, right? And he's like, nailed it. I like having another party. Let's do that. And so they throw a party to celebrate the party that they had. And so after 180 days of a party, they throw a 7-day party for that party. Esther chapter 1, verse 7 and 8 talks about this party. It says, wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant. It kept in keeping with the king's liberality. Lots of wine, basically. Okay, lots of wine. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink in his own way. Drink whatever you want, as much as you want, right? But the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. After 187 days of partying, the King Xerxes, you'll never believe this, he was drunk. Amazingly, right? And it turns out that he makes the decision under the influence of alcohol that I'm not sure he would have made had he been sober. He starts thinking about his queen, and he decides it would be a good idea to call her to do a dance in front of all his friends, right? All his drunk friends. So verse 10 and 11, on the 7th day when King Xerxes was, quote, in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown in order to, here's the words, display her. To display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. And so he had a little too much to drink. He wants to show off his wife, and that's it. He gets the vibe that's really, it's really more, I mean, you get the vibe it's more objectification than anything. He wants to put her on display. Doesn't really care about her. And so he calls for his wife, and so in the movie, we have this part of Queen Vashti that we're not told a lot about her, right? We're told that she's beautiful, now don't mistake beauty for weakness, because I think when you look at her character here, because this is a beautiful woman, but this is a strong woman, right? She's very strong. And so I was needed to cast a beautiful woman in this role, and I decided to talk to my wife about who to choose. And Gal Gadot, right? Well, you might know her as Wonder Woman, right? She plays Wonder Woman. Strong, and when King Xerxes demands that Wonder Woman come out and do a dance for his drunk friends, and that went about as well as you would expect it would, right? She said, no way, I'm not doing that. Verse 12, but when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. And that's all. That's all we really know about her, right? But let's give it up for Queen Vashti, right? Come on. Standing up to the king, that's right. Because that is not nothing, what she did. She's like, no, I'm not going out there and being put on display like this. King Xerxes, of course, he wasn't happy, right? He wasn't happy about this at all. Verse 12, then the king became furious and burned with anger. And so he gets his advisors together. Verse 15, according to the law, King Xerxes says, what must be done to Queen Vashti? She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. And we'll learn a few things about King Xerxes. Number one, he refers to himself in the third person. Ladies, that's a red flag. If you look at that guy, like if you're going to go out with somebody and they start talking about themselves in the third person, I'd leave, right? That's probably what you want to do, run. The other thing we learned about King Xerxes is that he has this thing that people in power, specifically men in power, often can have. That is, they don't like to be told no, right? People in power, they don't like to be told no. They have an issue with someone questioning their authority. And that's what happens to King Xerxes. And he's not having it. He tells his advisors, what do we do about this? And the advisors say, verse 17 through 18, the queen's conduct will become known to all women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. Hey, if the queen can treat the king this way, then we can treat our husbands this way. Right? This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. You need to do something about this. You need to make an example out of her, is what they're telling him. They don't encourage him to respond in humility or self-awareness. Like a lot of men, he listens to a group of friends who are in no position to give relationship advice. And Xerxes decides to make an example of Queen Vashti. And he banishes her from the kingdom. Get out of here. And so now we have in our story a king without a queen. And that's the end of Act 1, Scene 1 of In the Shadows, right? You've got this powerful, power-tripping king who seems to be drunk a lot. And you got this beautiful queen who's strong and has a mind of her own. And we see what happens in the story when she opposes the king. One thing we haven't heard so far in the story is God, right? As mentioned, he was one character we don't need to cast in this story. Sorry, Morgan Freeman. There's no part for you to play in this one. God doesn't show up. He's never mentioned. He's never referenced. He's not acknowledged in the entire book. Again, it's the only book of the Bible where God isn't mentioned. Doesn't seem to have a role. But there's a reason why we are calling this In the Shadows. And that is because sometimes when God's presence isn't obvious, his power is. Just because you can't see him doesn't mean that he's not at work. That he's not at work in your life and in what's happening around us in this world of ours. The poet James Russell wrote these words, behind the dim unknown stands God in the shadows, keeping watch over his own. God is in the shadows, keeping watch over his own. And as we study the story, you'll begin to see God is at work. He's in the shadows. And it might feel, in this story, it might feel like your story. Like maybe you feel like he isn't present. It might seem like he isn't paying attention. You might think he isn't concerned, but what we discover is God is moving kings and queens like pawns on a chessboard to accomplish his purpose. And just because you don't see it doesn't mean he isn't working. And just because you don't feel it doesn't mean he isn't working. He is always working. And as we start this new year, I just want to say, I'll say it to you, you may have forgotten. God has not forgotten you. God has not forgotten you. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. He may seem silent for a while, and maybe because of that, you haven't been praying as much. It doesn't seem like it's making much difference in your life. But what if God is working in the shadows in a way that you just can't see right now? What if he has for you something different than what you had for you? Will you trust him? What if his timing is different than your timing? What if you're right about the what, but you're wrong about the when? And God's at work. And you just don't see it. You just don't feel it. Proverbs 19:21 is one of my favorite proverbs. And it's because the proverb, depending on where my faith is at the time, it's either really encouraging or really exasperating. All right? And Proverbs 19:21 says this. It says, we make our plans, but the purposes of the Lord will prevail. Right? Now, that to you might be exasperating. Like if you've got your plans and God isn't acting according to your plans, could be frustrating. Maybe you made your plans and things haven't gone the way you had hoped. They haven't unfolded how you thought they might. And you're encouraged by the fact that even though you've made plans, the purposes of God have not been thwarted. Just because your plans haven't worked. Like the purposes of God prevail. No matter what our plans. And there are a lot of people in this room who would testify to the God who is in the shadows keeping watch over his own. You've had those moments in your life where you couldn't see it, you couldn't feel it, and from where you sat, it seemed like he wasn't there. He was absent. And then in hindsight, you're like, oh yeah, I just didn't know. I can see it now. Years ago, I just finished school for law enforcement. I was looking for a full-time job as a police officer, and I applied for 40 open positions, 40 across the whole Twin Cities area. I got 40 rejections. Still got them, right? I have a folder of 40 rejections. I thought it was kind of good to keep them. It wasn't going as I had planned. I knew I would make a good police officer. I knew it would be good for my family to have this career. I was discouraged when I wasn't selected for one of these positions I applied for. But then my wife and I found out we were going to have a baby. Aubrey was born. I didn't have a full-time job when she was born, and which allowed me to become a stay-at-home dad, which we needed someone at home. And I was able to be with her and help and raise her. And if I was a police officer, that wouldn't have been the case. And then that led me to becoming your pastor, because that all transitioned to here, this moment. If my plan had been completed, God's wouldn't have been. And looking back, it doesn't seem like it. In that moment when I was getting my rejections, it felt like this was a moment of darkness, of sadness. But what we discovered was God was in the shadows, keeping watch over his own. God working in the shadows to accomplish his purpose. Romans 8:28 says, we studied this last year, if you remember, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. I believe he's going to do that in your life in 2026. Because there are going to be people this year that you haven't met. There's going to be circumstances that you aren't even aware of. There will be situations that you're going to face this year. And I'll just tell you that God will not be absent in those moments. And even if you don't feel his presence, do not doubt his power. Like a clockmaker who fixes clocks. Sometimes the pieces, they bring pieces to him. The clockmaker doesn't have all the pieces. That they don't give it to him. And he has to fix it and supply his own pieces. And sometimes they're not all there. But the clockmaker fixes the clock anyways. We are invited here as we start 2026 to just give him the pieces. And some of the most broken pieces. Or some of the pieces that don't feel like that's significant. Like, I don't know why it belongs in this clock. Or some of the pieces that we want to just hold on to for ourselves. We need to release it to him. And we say, God, do your work in me. Do your work through me. Here are my pieces. Fix this. Fix me. And maybe that's a relationship in your life that's become fractured and broken. And you've tried to repair it on your own. Or maybe you hoped it would heal naturally, but it hasn't. And things are harder this year than they were last year. And you're tempted to just give up on it all. I just ask that you see what you're holding. And maybe you're holding on to some pride. Or maybe you're holding on to bitterness and resentment that, quite frankly, is well-deserved, maybe. What would it look like if you just began, through prayer, to release those things to God? And say, God, here are the pieces. Can you do something with this? Because I can't. There's just a lot of areas in our life where we often feel disappointment and disillusioned. But the invitation is, God, here are the pieces. Will you work? Act 1, Scene 2 of our movie. If Scene 1 was all about this ungodly party, then Scene 2 is really about this unexpected person. So Queen Vashti is banished from the kingdom. And then 4 years pass when we pick up Scene 2, and King Xerxes he's beginning to miss Wonder Woman, right? He's beginning to miss her. Like he's beginning to think maybe this was a bad idea. And I should have been humbled. I should say he's been humbled probably a few times now. But now the Greeks are starting to gain some power in the region and with the Persians, and he's feeling a little depressed and discouraged, and so his advisors suggest something as a way to get his spirits lifted up. They're like, hey, why don't you do this first season of the show Bachelor, right? We'll have this huge beauty pageant. We'll invite women from all over the kingdom, and they'll go through this competition, and at the end, you get to choose which one you want to be your new queen, right? And the king's like, okay, that sounds like a good idea, right? Sounds great. Let's do that. And so they have this huge beauty pageant, And a Jewish man named Mordecai enters his young cousin named Esther. She doesn't enter herself into this. She's entered into it because by her cousin Mordecai. Esther 2:7. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, who he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. She was an orphan living in a foreign land. Okay? This girl, who was also known as Esther, the Bible says, was lovely in form and feature, and Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. And so now we got to cast Mordecai, right? He's someone in the movie, so we got to cast him. So I thought this part was pretty easy because as we read about Mordecai, he's eager, kind of has like this childlike eagerness about him, but he's also very sincere. He's a little bit quirky. He's also shrewd, right? He's pretty shrewd. And so here's who we're going to go with for cousin Mordecai. How about Jeff Goldblum for Mordecai, right? I think that works. I think it's a good call. And Mordecai hears about this beauty pageant, and he has this beautiful cousin who he's raised as his daughter, and she's known as Esther. And the Bible says she was beautiful. And I was trying to think of someone who could play the role of Esther, and I thought about maybe like Zendaya from Spider-Man, but then I decided on, I don't know if you saw the live action Aladdin, right? Naomi Scott plays Jasmine for that movie. And so I just, she fit the role. So I'd throw her in there, right? She'll play the part of Esther. And if you and I were to look at Esther, we would almost immediately rule her out as someone God would use in a dramatic way, right? Like now she has all kinds of strikes against her. But I'll give you just 3. Strike 1, she was Jewish. Right? Living in exile in this foreign land, the Jews were conquered foreigners, forced to live in this country. Because she was Jewish living in this land, that means she had 0 rights. She had no rights at all. She had no power, no position, no esteem, no wealth, nothing. That's strike 1. Strike number 2, she's a woman, and in those times, women were not treated with much respect or given much power. That's still true in the Middle East today. It's in that culture. Especially at that time, you'll never think a woman could be used in a way that would change the history of the world back then. But what's going to happen is Esther is preserving the messianic line so that Jesus would be born. Right? But she's a woman. Strike 2. That's 2 strikes. 3 strikes. She was an orphan. Esther didn't have a mom or dad to look after her, to raise her up. She didn't have that kind of security and those kind of examples. And we don't know what happened to her mom and dad, but because they were exiles in a brutal land, you can just imagine that their death wasn't very nice. It's probably pretty tragic. And graciously, when she had nowhere to go, when no one to take care of her, her cousin Mordecai adopted her as his own. But Esther is this foreign orphan girl living in Persia. So that's strike 3. So she's not what you would call, well-positioned to be a person of impact in this story. But this is one of the ways that God moves in the shadows. He will use the least likely people to accomplish His greatest purpose. God can use anyone to do anything, anywhere He wants. We're told that Esther is beautiful. So Mordecai enters her into the beauty pageant. And two things happened that seemed to clearly be outside of what God would have been, like what God would have used. So in this story about God's will unfolding, you have 2 things happen that seem to be contrary to what God His expressed will would have been. Number 1, we find out that Esther hid her nationality. Right? She was Hadassah, but she goes by Esther, and she's hiding her faith in the one true God. And God, in His love for His people, had forbidden Israelites from marrying non-Israelites because it leads to spiritual compromise. Like that was an express thing that God said. And so by Esther being in this pageant to marry the king, she's in the pageant to marry the most non-Israelite person out there. The most non-Israelite of the non-Israelites. Clearly not part of God's will, right? Second thing we know about Esther is that she compromises sexually. But I'm going to word that a little bit differently. She was compromised sexually. There's no indication that she had any real choice in the matter. Like there's not really any reason to assume that she had a lot of power in making this decision. They were likely made for her. But whatever the case, whether she was compromised sexually or she was compromised sexually, that wouldn't be a part of God's will for her. But here's what we can be encouraged by. God can use you and bless you no matter what you've done, no matter what has been done to you. Doesn't matter. He will still use you. It's a big part of what we studied going through Romans, that He is the Redeemer. It's my favorite thing about God. That He can redeem us. He can redeem anything. He can redeem you. And that's not to minimize anything you've done. It's not to minimize anything that's been done to you. Like, pain is real. I'm not saying it isn't. Like, the guilt and regret is heavy. But it's to realize that God can do whatever He wants. God can redeem and restore and rebuild. There's no boundaries to His grace, and there's no limit to His love, and there's nothing that He cannot turn for good. And if He did it for Esther, He can do it for you. He can do it for me. No matter what position you find yourself in, or how many strikes you think you have against yourself, He can do it. Chapter 2, verse 12. Before a girl's turn came to go into the King Xerxes, go into him, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months of oil and myrrh, and 6 with perfume and cosmetics. She takes 12 months to get ready, right? Like, you think your wife takes a long time to get ready. 12 months is a long time. Let me just tell you. She's getting ready to go in, 12 months to meet the king. And I just want you to think, though, for a moment about what that would have been like for this young orphan girl in a foreign land. Like, how scary would that have been? 12 months of insecurity, 12 months of wondering if she would be chosen, 12 months of thinking, well, there's no chance. There's no chance this is going to happen. But she keeps going. Keeps making it past the next round, keeps getting the rose. And she starts to wonder if she, as an orphan Jewish girl, could possibly become the next queen of Persia. So God is in the shadows when we find ourselves in seasons of waiting. I would say that the hardest part of God's will is often not the what, but the when. Like, you have a good sense of maybe what He wants to do, but boy, His timing doesn't match up, right, with what your timing is supposed to be, what you think it should be. And it hasn't happened yet, and you're starting to wonder if it's going to ever happen. And there's a lot about God's will that I don't understand. But God's timing seems to be some of the most challenging things. But I would just say, if you find yourself in a season of waiting, and maybe this will be a 12-month year of waiting for you. Maybe this year is a waiting year in some way for something. I would just tell you, God doesn't waste the waiting. He's working in the shadows of the waiting, working behind the scenes. It can be a time of frustration. It can be a time of anticipation. It all comes down to whether or not you have faith. So if you have been asking God, where are you? Maybe shift that question to, God, I know you're here. Help me see what you're doing. And finally, the big day arrives, and the time comes for Esther to go in to see the king. And he considers her the most beautiful woman in the land. And Esther wins the beauty contest, right? Esther becomes queen. And we're going to discover that God puts Esther in a perfect position to change the course of history. He's in the shadows, keeping watch over her. He's in the shadows, keeping watch over his own. And what happens next? Well, what happens next is kind of shocking. But you'll have to come back next week to hear that one. Or you can read your Bible this week, right, on your own. That's also an option. One thing I want you to remember as we start this year, God is working to accomplish His purpose. Do not underestimate who He will use or what He will do or how He will work. Don't do it. Don't underestimate Him. And you may come from the wrong background. You may come from the wrong family. You may have made the wrong decisions in life. And from where you sit, you're not worthy. But you don't have to sit. You don't sit where God sits. And where God sits, He sees a son and He sees a daughter. And so you might go into this year feeling disqualified because of your past mistakes, overlooked because of your circumstances. You might feel frustrated because of the waiting or uncertain because of the season you're in. But remember Esther, this orphan girl, a foreigner that is perfectly positioned for God to accomplish His purpose. And maybe the very thing that you think makes you unqualified and unlikely is the very thing that God will use in your life to accomplish His purpose. Maybe that job you think is beneath you. Maybe the marriage you've given up on. Maybe that family of origin you come from. All these strikes you think you have against you. Maybe that's your Persian palace. The very place God has positioned you for impact. And this week I want you to do something specific as we start this year. As we begin this series, I want you to write down your strikes. Just pick 3. Pick your 3 strikes. You can put them on a note on your phone. You can put them on a piece of paper. Do it before you go to bed tonight. Just write down 3 strikes. It shouldn't be that hard, right? It's not that hard. Maybe something you think disqualifies you. Maybe circumstances that you can't control, or situations that just caused you so much frustration, or creates a lot of fear in your life. 3 strikes, and then I just want you to write 2 words next to each strike. Each of them. 2 words. But God. ... Okay? Strike number 1, but God. ... Strike number 2, but God. ... Strike 3, but God. ... And let's just see throughout the course of this year how God works in the shadows, keeping watch over His own. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank You for keeping watch over us. Help us to keep the faith, even when times seem like You're not here. We don't see the action. We don't see Your movement. Help us to have confidence in the faith in You, knowing that You work all things for the good. Lord, just keep our heads up in times of struggle, times of challenging times, and help us not to get frustrated and feel like we're disqualified from Your service, because we know You can use us for Your purpose. You can use all of us for Your purpose. And we ask